Okay, maybe we'll make a start. And if anyone joins, yeah, after this, then that's grand. But yeah, welcome everybody to our discussion. I'm very delighted to be joined by Kirsty Mackay to talk about the project, The Magic Bunny Tree. So I'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping to begin with. Um, so yeah, you're all very welcome. We'd really love to hear from you tonight, so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box and to leave any questions or comments throughout the discussion. We're asking if you can keep your mics muted for now, but there will be an opportunity to ask questions later on in the discussion. But just so no noise comes through in the meantime, you can also, yeah, ask questions in the chat. And we'd really welcome a lively discussion and for you to share your thoughts for us with us. There will be a kind of break where you can ask questions directly as well. So yeah, just to let you know, we are recording this event so that we can add a transcribed version to YouTube later on. So you're very welcome to have your camera on or off, whatever you prefer. And also just to let you know that closed captions are enabled in the Zoom room if you do wish to use them. So that's that. Yeah, I think we'll get started. Um, so yeah, welcome, Kirsty. Thank you so much for joining us. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about your collaborative project, The Magic Money Tree, which is currently exhibited at Open Eye Gallery in our atrium space. So just for a bit of background, the Magic Money Tree is made collaboratively with groups and individuals from across England, and documentary photographer Kirsty Mackay explores the impact of the cost of living crisis and what poverty looks like in the world's sixth richest economy. So Kirsty has worked closely with children and families and youth groups, primarily in Tipton, Bristol, and the northeast of England, to develop skills in photography, issuing them with compact film cameras and encouraging them to consider the power of their own voice and how to use it. So their narrative is one that's told collectively through photography and text and banners in the exhibition, collectively questioning to what extent is poverty a political choice. So I hope you've had a chance to catch the exhibition in Liverpool. If not, it is on for the final weekend. So it's on with us until the 13th of October, which is this Sunday. Um, but if that is not enough time for you, it's moving to Bristol next. So from Tuesday the 15th next week, it'll be exhibited at Bristol Photo Festival. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you, Kirsty, about this project. Um, and I guess we could just start by sharing a bit about the work. And yeah, kind of, I know this is the exhibition at Open Eye, but if you want to kind of, yeah, introduce the work.
Sure. Thank you, Sorha. So this is the Magic Money Tree at Open Eye Gallery. I was lucky enough to get a National Lottery Project grant from the Arts Council to do this. Um, and I decided to kind of focus my efforts into three communities. Um, and that was South Bristol, where I live, Tipton in the Black Country, and South Shields in the Northeast. This is a picture from Tipton. And the title comes from this quote. So, this is what Theresa May said in 2017 in response to a nurse who was talking about stagnant wages on BBC Question Time. And I had the title, The Magic Money Tree, right at the beginning of the project. Because the project involved so many children and young people, I liked the title because it sounded to me a bit like a children's story, but at the same time, it really talks about economics. Um, And part of my process was to work very closely with children and young people and families and work collaboratively. And I had a whole set of compact film cameras that I handed out, and I taught workshops to children and young people, as well as taking my own photographs. And so this is one of the photographs from a workshop in Tipton. And one of the most difficult things for me was going into communities where I had no connections and trying to meet people um, and get to know people to the extent that they trusted me to tell their stories. And in Tipton, I kind of met one man who was like the anchor to the community for me. And that's kind of what you hope to do if you're making your way into a community. You want to find someone that can anchor you there. And for me, that person was James. And James introduced me to Vicky, who ran a dance studio. And part of her dance studio, she offers workshops in the holidays. And as part of the workshop, the kids get breakfast. And she would have kids coming into her workshops. They were free workshops that hadn't eaten breakfast. So after getting to know Vicky, I suggested we did a photography workshop in the Easter holidays. And this was one of the photographs from the workshop in the Easter holidays. And so I worked with, I think there was about 15 children from about 6 to 12 in this workshop. And we started off in the dance studio, talking and drawing pictures. And then when I handed out the cameras, we kind of exploded into the shopping centre. And the atmosphere was really quite amazing. All the children absolutely loved having their photograph taken, and they really loved taking pictures. And what we got was a lot of cartwheels, a lot of gymnastics and dancing in front of the camera. And for such a kind of serious subject, these are some of the photographs that give the work a completely different energy. And I'll pause it there, Sorha.
Thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, as you say, like it's a very serious subject matter, but the exhibition itself is very multi-layered. So kind of like your own documentary photos. Um, the children's voices in there, their own photographs, and yeah, very like joyful moments like this one, and then direct quotes as well from the people involved. Um, so yeah, I suppose as a starting point, I was kind of interested in that move into working in a collaborative way. So you describe this project as kind of your first fully collaborative project. And yeah, I was just kind of interested in why the decision to move into working in that way and why it felt important.
Yeah, so when I worked on my previous book, The Fish That Never Swam, it was all about Glasgow and Glasgow's health inequalities. And despite growing up in Glasgow and being from Glasgow, I was still going into other communities that I didn't have any connections to and I didn't know. And when I did visual research about these areas, what I saw, the pictures I saw online were this is I'm talking especially about Easter House, which is a housing estate on the edge of the city. The only pictures I saw were news images when a crime had been committed in the area, and that was my first kind of layer of research into the place. And then when I started to dig deeper, I found a Facebook group where people just put their own photographs of the area. And in that group, the pictures were of birthday parties and children playing in the garden. And it showed me this very different side to the community. And I think at first I was maybe concerned about working in communities I wasn't a part of
Mm.
because I have seen a lot of work um, where photographers have made work about a community and it's been quite surface in a way. And I didn't want to do that. And I know the process of being a photographer and going into a community, I know that you can bring your own preconceived ideas of that community. And you can also bring your own prejudice of that community. And if you work there for a long period of time, there's this process of learning that happens, and you learn what it's really like. And so you get deeper. Um, but I also just didn't want it to be my seen through my lens. I thought it was really important that the places I was photographing were seen through other people's gaze, and not just mine.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I get what you're saying. And that kind of, I suppose, like that awareness of like the inherent power dynamics that kind of happen when you are behind the camera, photographing people. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
In this session,
Um,
I was working with, there was a family of 10 children, and I had three of them in the workshop. And the photographs they took of each other were amazing. So in particular, there's a photograph of a little girl called Talisa, photographed by her brother. And I would never have been able to get a photograph of her like that because she's responding to her brother and it's so natural. And, it really made me think about what are my strengths and what can other people bring to it. So, I was very much learning about how to work collaboratively and when to step back and when to allow for other people's strengths. And that was a process that I went through making the work.
yeah, I really love that of kind of like you're learning along the way as well, kind of like sharing experiences with the people that you're working with and kind of working out, yeah, how to work together, I suppose. And yeah, I wondered if you could talk a bit about kind of like why it felt important to work with children in particular, um, and include the voices of young people and I suppose that kind of like process of working together, which you've kind of touched on.
Yeah, I think it's only just dawning on me. One of the reasons that I really wanted to work with children and young people, and it's because I was one of those kids and young people. Um, so I didn't grow up in poverty, but we were definitely on the breadline. And my friends at school were experiencing poverty, and had parents that were in active addiction. And I kind of describe my environment when I was a child as violent. And it was violent because of people were struggling and they didn't have money. And so I still feel the effect of that in my body. I'm still aware of the kind of long-term implications of growing up in these kind of conditions. Um, and the other thing about so I think if you make a project about children in photography, it can be seen as not a very serious subject and it can be kind of overlooked in a way. Um, but for this, what I just see time and time again is when people talk about poverty, it's the individual that's blamed. And with my previous work, as well as this, it was all about looking at environments and connecting the political policies to places. And you, children, no one gets to choose where they're born, and so children are completely innocent when it comes to how they grew up. Um, and also, there's so many political policies that directly affect children, like the two-child benefit cap, like the lack of universal free school meals in England.
Yeah, definitely. I think like um just bringing it back to kind of like that these like young people are being like directly affected by those policies. And I think um like the exhibition does that really well with the I suppose like the context is set from the title but also kind of commentary around like government spending and yeah, like how this directly affects people and people's lives. Um, but yeah, I suppose, kind of interested in that kind of like role and kind of traversing your role as a photographer, but also kind of like a researcher, a sociologist, and um yeah, I was just kind of interested if you want to talk a bit more about that, I suppose, like how you kind of weave those things together in people's personal stories, but bringing it back to quite like yeah, like political decisions that have been like damaging.
Yeah, I think with the Magic Money Tree, I felt like my role was to make visible the line that starts in Westminster, that goes from the decisions that politicians make all the way into communities and the impact individuals. So that was my kind of guiding kind of principle in the project, is trying to make that line visible. And I used lots of different things to try and illustrate that. So I'm using my own photographs. I'm using other people's pictures. I'm doing interviews about people's own experience. And then I'm also connecting people's own experience to policies and quotes from experts. I think I especially like when I've done an interview with someone and then I find a quote from like an expert or a politician that connects those things really well. So it's like one thing reinforces the other.
Mhm.
Um, but in the process, it kind of starts with the research, and then it's about me going out into the world with questions. And I'm trying to answer those questions with the people that I'm meeting and the people that I'm working with. And then at the end, bringing the research in again and um, trying to, bring the research back in and find, what exact pieces of research can really illustrate most clearly and back up people's experiences.
Mhm. Mhm. And yeah, is that something that you kind of um bring into those conversations as well with people um and like have discussions around while you're making the work?
I mean, yeah, so I started by asking people why they thought we were in a cost of living crisis and what caused it and what were the possible solutions. So yeah, I'm trying to open that up and hear what people what they think and get that kind of picture, which is really difficult to do. Like it's really when you're living something, it's really difficult to see that bigger picture. And as the work went on, the story got bigger. And in the book, especially, I was able to not just talk about the cost of living crisis, but we were able to go back further and go back to kind of Margaret Thatcher and neoliberalism and connect more of those things to the cost of living crisis. Because I didn't think it was fair to talk about the cost of living crisis in isolation.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. And kind of just like the importance of kind of I suppose like making those links and having those conversations. Um, and yeah, like kind of I suppose like forming community and reaching out to community through that as well. Yeah, I think it might be a nice time just to pause in case anyone does have any questions at this point. Yeah, you're very welcome to either raise your hand or pop a question in the chat. If you have a burning question, please do ask it. That's okay. I don't think I can see any hands. But yeah, if anything springs to mind, yeah, let us know. Oh, we have one. Um, so this is from Anna. So Anna's asking, working with vulnerable communities like this must mean that you've come across some heartbreaking lived experiences. How do you navigate these with care, without compromising your own well-being?
Yeah, I mean, there were many times that I would be going home on the train afterwards, and I'd done interviews with people and listened to just how difficult things were. And I think being on the train for me was my decompression time. And I would sometimes just write down everything to get it out of my head. Um, that's kind of what I would do for myself. But when I'm talking to somebody and doing an interview, um, I'm very aware of what I use and how we can tell their story in a way that's safe for them. So quite often I'm only telling small fragments of each person's story, but I'm working with so many people that I can tell the story by using lots of people's story together so that no one person is too vulnerable. Um, and the way I interview people changes quite a lot. Sometimes, if it's a really difficult subject matter, I'm not really even asking questions. Um, it might be more of a chat, and it's just two people talking, and I talk about myself and they talk about their self. And if they want to tell me anything, it will come out. Um, and I think I have heard of this technique in counseling called mirroring, and it's about listening to someone and you saying something back to them in a way that they recognize that you've actually listened to them and you've been heard. And that's something that I didn't do purposely, but I noticed that I do that. That's something that I do kind of naturally. So I think I try and just set up a space where people feel comfortable and is a safe space. And I'm mostly going into people's homes, not all the time, but my my preferred method is to go to someone's home and do an interview. And I love the dynamic of going into someone else's house because I feel that in that scenario, I'm the person that's more vulnerable. And there's all that kind of code of when you go to someone's house, I take my shoes off, people will make you a cup of tea and you're in their safe environment. And so that's my preferred way of working. Um, it doesn't always work like that. Some people didn't want me to go to their house. And so in Tipton, especially, I ended up doing interviews in the chip shop, various different places. Um, but yeah, I kind of went off on one. I hope I answered the question.
No, you did definitely. Yeah, I think that like importance of not going in with a kind of agenda as well, and actually um like wanting to listen to people and to hear them um is like so important in this kind of work. And I suppose like that care that you've talked about as well, about kind of like what parts do you include, and what parts do you kind of omit to kind of give people yeah, like not expose kind of people too much as well. I kind of wanted to follow up on that just around kind of the idea of space and agency as being central in how you work with people, particularly when working with vulnerable groups or difficult subjects. And um, I suppose, yeah, like just talking a bit about like in our previous discussions, we talked about kind of like how people are photographed, and kind of I suppose like getting that balance between that people can tell their stories and be seen and heard, but also are protected in that. And I was wondering if you could maybe just talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think so I was really aware that, photographing poverty is such a difficult subject to photograph, especially now, because I think there's even more shame around it. So it's a very difficult thing to photograph. And what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to make pictures of people that made them look like one-dimensional victims. Um, and I'm going to talk about this picture actually, because this picture, it was part of a small commission for Bristol Photo Festival in Historic England about the High Street. And the festival connected me with a food bank just off the High Street. And so when I went into the food bank to make work, I knew I wasn't going to photograph people at the food bank. I didn't want to do that. And so what I did was I just went in and talked to people. So at this food bank, you sit down with a volunteer and you go through a list and you get to choose what you want. And then as your bags are being made up, there was some time. So I would go and talk to people. Um, and then I took some of their words and then I wrote them on the high street to make the images. And there's also some images with people in them. And in those ones, I almost like borrowed people's identity to try and make a picture together that was not showing people visiting the food bank. Um, so it's a super difficult subject. And so I'm looking for ways where I'm also insisting, well, kind of asking for a lot from people. I'm asking for a lot of engagement because if I don't get engagement from people, I think might look passive. So what I'm really trying to get from people is get to know people, get to know what they think, listen to them and photograph them where they have some kind of agency. And I'm not there to photograph people looking weak. I'm more there to photograph their strength and listen to what they've got to say.
Yeah, yeah. I think that like really comes through. Um, yeah, and I think those images like of the quotes are just um really lovely. Like I think there's just a real sense of I don't know, I think like that like people have been heard and their words are very like present in the series. Um but yeah, with care. So yeah, thank you for kind of talking a bit more about that. We've got another question in the chat. So Cleona is asking, really interesting work, Kirsty. I love the way children's natural energy challenges the deficit policy discourse. Is it challenging navigating what is a bleak political landscape with children, given the cost of living crisis is likely to persist for the whole of their childhood?
Yeah, I mean it really is. With the older children, I did a session in Bristol, and these kids were from like 11 to 14, and we kind of did this chart, like a timeline. So we started at 2008 with the financial crash, and then we put down welfare reforms, and then we put down austerity, and it was so depressing. It was really, really depressing because some of those kids weren't even born in 2008. Um, and it was very difficult. With that age group of children, I did talk to them about the cost of living crisis, and it was too difficult to talk to children about what they were experiencing. The way I found to talk about it was more generally, like there are some children that are going to school without packed lunches, you know. Um, I think, a lot of the time children are being protected by their parents as much as possible. And so you know, and the way around it I found was, to talk about that children in general, this is happening to children in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, thank you for that question. And yeah, just to kind of move into that and talk about how you worked with the young people as well. Like there's a really lovely image at the end of the exhibition. Maybe we're going to have a chat about later, but I suppose like how you work with children and kind of using the language of activism and kind of how you worked together. Yeah, and asking them
It's-
what they thought.
yeah.
Yeah, I was really interested in that.
Yeah. So I think it was part of my visual research. I was looking at pictures of the working class, and I kept coming up. I kept seeing pictures of on the picket lines, people holding placards and protest. And then I started to research into the Great Depression. I was trying to compare the Great Depression with the cost of living crisis. And in those photographs, I saw people holding placards, and there was one especially of a man with a sandwich board, and he had written on it how many months he'd been unemployed and how many children he had to feed. And so all these visual research pictures sort of fed their way back into the image making. And I think it comes from me wanting not to take pictures of people being passive and victims. And I suppose the opposite of that is agency and activism. And
Mm.
so with this group of children in Bristol, we made the placards, and the children could make a placard about anything they cared about. I asked them what issues they really cared about, and they made a placard about whatever they wanted. And it worked in quite a broad way, because I knew that I would be able to use a sliver of it. And there was two placards that really fitted with the story that I was telling. Um, but the children got to make something that they cared about. So that was important to me as well. And so that's how the placards came into it. And I especially love this picture because in a way I had so little to do with it. I kind of set it up and and the kids, they took over and I couldn't have imagined making this picture, but that's the process it came from.
Yeah, it's a brilliant picture. Um, but yeah, it's taken by another child, isn't it? As well. Yeah. Um, yeah, I love that. And I think, yeah, just like creating that space and opportunity for children to kind of share their opinions on things and be asked what they think. Um, yeah, it feels like really important. And I suppose I wanted to kind of maybe touch on like some of the challenges of that as well, on specifically working with children or like the kind of responsibilities of that, even like as time kind of moves on as well, I suppose. And the work still exists at like made at a certain point in time. I was wondering, yeah, if you could kind of talk about that.
Yeah, so one thing that something I didn't want was I didn't want anybody to be searching the internet in 10 years' time and be able to type in a name of a child that I had worked with and connect them to a project about poverty. I didn't want any of these young people to potentially, because we've no idea where they're going to go in the world. They might be going for a job interview one day. Who knows? They might, and I didn't want that kind of, you know, that line to be there on the internet. And so to safeguard against that, I've only used children's first names. Um, and I know from experience when I've used people's adults' surnames, sometimes what happens is other journalists and like film and TV producers get in touch with me or my participants. And I think that's okay if you're an adult. Um, but I didn't want that for the kids. So I've only used their first names to try and, protect against that.
Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. I kind of wanted to um, talk a little bit about yeah, emotions, those kind of like emotions that are present. I read a really brilliant interview with Jem Bartholomew that you did, and it kind of is talking about anger as that driving force. Um, and also like the importance of joy in your work. And I suppose I kind of wanted to talk about a bit about that and kind of, yeah, how both of those things can be present.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be angry about. And I think what anger does for me is it absolutely fuels the work. Um, but I don't stay angry because the anger that I have, it transforms into the photographs. Um, and the anger I feel, it points me towards action. And when you're able to take action, well, the anger dissipates. It becomes something else. And I think, anger, well, I'm really lucky because I've got a medium to channel my anger. And I think anger's, it's dangerous when you don't have any any way to channel it, you know, like we saw over the summer with the fascist and racist riots. You have your people who are angry and they are kind of channeling that misguidedly towards other people and blaming them when it was nothing to do with them. Um, but yeah, I feel really fortunate that I can channel my anger and it becomes something else. And the joy is like just super important because there's always joy. So this is a very sad photograph, but when I show this picture, I try and show it in context. And in the context, it was this is a drop-in cafe in South Shields, which is a really joyous place. So when I first went there, um, my stomach kind of flipped over because there were so many people that were so visibly in need. Um, but the actual atmosphere of the cafe is so friendly and so joyous. And so when I show this picture, I kind of sandwich it in between photographs of the volunteers making tea, handing out free hot meals. Um, I kind of sandwich it in between those pictures of care. Generally, I really try and keep pictures in context. Um, Yeah, and moments later, someone came and put their hand on this guy's shoulder and he woke up. So he wasn't completely alone, but he's a man that was rough sleeping and he came into this safe, warm space and had a cup of tea and felt so safe he just fell asleep. But at the same time, he was surrounded by care and friendship and love. And so I think for me, the joy is about telling both sides of the story.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, and kind of avoiding like a one-sided view. And I think, yeah, a lot of the images taken at St Hilda's really show that as well, like that sense of community and coming together. Um, yeah, so yeah, if anybody has any questions, yeah, keep them coming. Um, yeah, maybe if sorry, I'm going away ahead of myself, but I'll let you talk, Kirsty, for a bit. Yeah, about this image.
Yeah, I want to talk about this picture because the reason I took it is because I had this quote, and this quote comes from a guy in Glasgow that I was working with. And in December 2022, I sent a photo essay to The Guardian on the cost of living crisis. And that was me like just gearing up to make the work in 2023. I was kind of exploring how to visually tell the story. And I made this photo essay. And this quote was like my full stop in the essay, and it was really important to me. And it got cut, it got edited out, and things are edited out all the time. That happens. But I really felt like the editor just hadn't seen the significance of this phrase, and so um, I decided to make it into a photograph. So I wrote it on the wall in Filton in Bristol. And I just thought if I made it into a photograph, I'll get it into the work. It will get printed because it's harder perhaps to ignore a picture than just like a couple of sentences. So that's how that picture came about.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting that, isn't it? That kind of like such a kind of center point as well for like the context of the project. Um, and as your work appears, I suppose like in different ways that can be like changed and altered. But
And what
Yeah.
I feel that because the media is so middle class dominant, I feel that I have to push against that because I feel as someone from a working class background, I've got extra insights into these kind of subjects. And not everybody does have that insight and expertise. So I feel like sometimes some of what I'm saying isn't fully understood.
Mm.
You know, so that was my solution.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah. Sorry, we'll just move on to this. I'm just sorry. On.
Um, so this is Jacqueline, and I'll read you part of her interview. So she said, during the COVID period, I had been homeless and had great difficulties. I couldn't get any help during that period to find anywhere else. I had to live in a tent. I've got a place to live now for the past 3 months. I'm just getting used to the cost of living because bills and everything like that, especially gas, all these things that you have to cope with once you do have a home and a roof above your head. It's quite difficult. It costs a lot to live. So, St Hilda's Church in South Shields was a place that I kept going back to. And this I went maybe once or twice without really taking any photographs. And then when I photographed Jacqueline, I had told people what I was doing, and I had a lot of people who wanted to tell their story. And so I probably did maybe like 12 photographs and 12 interviews that morning. Um, and I really felt there was a real need for people to tell their story. They were, they really wanted to have their say their piece and have their story heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think um so like this portrait, and there's another one taking kind of side on of another woman as well, but and it kind of tells a bit about their stories. Um, but yeah, they really kind of like shape the exhibition. And yeah, I think I suppose just hearing those that kind of like direct experience as well, and that kind of care, um, like taking and recording those stories. Um, I suppose, yeah, I kind of wanted to circle back around, I think, to kind of like um talking about your own perspective and some of I think like what you kind of said about the media and that kind of maybe like blindness to class is also present in the art world as well, and in photography, and kind of the importance of like bringing that perspective in, and like how your experience can inform that narrative. Um, yeah, I wondered if you could like talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think within photography, I see a lot of work made about working class communities that's really surface, that doesn't go deeper to ask questions, to ask why. I see some work that is, well, you have poverty porn. Some work is fetishistic, I'm saying that. And some work is like even macabre. Like some work is almost like a freak show. There's some work that's really shocking. Um, and I feel that when I show my work in the photography world, I sometimes feel that people don't even recognize it. Like they don't know. how to respond to it because it's perhaps not their vision of working class people that they're used to seeing. And so, yeah, I, you know, moving forwards, um, I'm thinking that what I want to do is perhaps do more writing along with my photography and move out of the photography world because I feel that my audience is more of a general audience. My work just doesn't fit well within the very narrow parameters of the kind of photo art world.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, um and I think I'm kind of thinking of yeah, your book, and I suppose how that kind of expands on those stories. And also about, I suppose, like the relationships you formed within the communities that you've worked in, and like the legacy of this work, and the legacy of those like relationships formed as well with people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm going to do with the book is going to donate a book to every library in the areas that I worked in. Um, and it's a small thing, but it is something that I can do to kind of pay back in a really small way to those communities.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and you talk about kind of like, I suppose, like taking a deeper dive into some of the like the political kind of subject matter as well in the book.
Yeah, so the book kind of varies a bit from the exhibited work because I was able to add more research into it. And so in the book, there's kind of minutes from work and pensions meetings, that happened in Parliament. There's loads more research that I could pack into it. Um, so yeah, I feel that the book it just gave me an opportunity to pack in more research and more evidence really. I had the space to do that in the book, yeah.
And yeah, have the people like Jacqueline or people that you've worked with kind of seen like the outcome of the project? How did they feel kind of like when you shared the work with them?
So that's kind of still ongoing. So some of the people in Tipton came to the exhibition in Walsall.
Mhm.
Um, some of the youth group in Bristol that I worked with, they're organising a trip to see the exhibition in Bristol. Um, some of the young people are going to come to my talk in Bristol. So I'm kind of working through that process. I haven't really been able to exhibit the work in the Northeast, but
Mm.
I am going to do some paste up exhibitions in South Shields and in Tipton on the street because it's important to me that the work is shown in a gallery space, but is also shown in the communities where it was made. So I'm in the process of doing that at the moment. This picture of Jacqueline went into the Guardian, and so I sent the link back up to Eunice, who runs the drop-in centre. So, I'll be able to go up to South Shields and show people, and especially when I've got the book out. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. And yeah, when you talk about kind of like where do you feel if there's places that you feel kind of that you don't know if your work um is like for this context or for like an art world context? Like where do you feel you kind of want it to be seen?
I think I guess I see my audience split. So there's the audience of people who have been going through the cost of living crisis, and they'll walk into a gallery and they might and see the magic money tree, and they might recognize their experience, and in some way might feel comforted that this is being talked about openly.
Yeah.
They might see someone like them in the photograph. And then I suppose there's people who are not connected to anyone that's struggling, who just will not be aware quite how bad things are. And so I hope it's also an education to other people like that as well.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's really important. To kind of, yeah, like be present and have those conversations and for people to feel seen and then also be in spaces where it kind of brings people's attention um like to that haven't had those experiences and gives people a voice. We're kind of we're at 7 actually. But yeah, if there's no more questions, which I'm assuming there's not, because they'd be in the chat, we'll kind of round up here. But I kind of just quickly wanted to mention that Kirsty's book, The Magic Money Tree, is currently in production with Blue Coat Press. And it is out on the 19th of October. So I'm just going to pop the link here in the chat in case I think that's for everyone. Um, yeah, hopefully you've got that. So yeah, you can pre-order the book. That'll be out in a couple of weeks. And Kirsty's exhibition of the Magic Money Tree in at Bristol Photo Festival will also open next Tuesday if you're in that part of the country. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to say a massive thank you, Kirsty, for your time this evening, and for a kind of closer look at the work. Um, just it was brilliant to talk to you. It's been great to have your work at the gallery and in Liverpool. And yeah, just very excited to kind of see the next phase and to see the book and that kind of thing. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your questions and for joining the conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sorha. Bye.
Bye everyone.